All right, guys, let's talk about the deadlift. The deadlift is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot that can go wrong. And a lot of people have some negative thoughts on the deadlift and how good or bad it is for your back. So we just want to address all of this. But the reality is you're not going to avoid deadlifts in your real life. You're always going to have to pick stuff up off the floor. So we want to develop techniques and habits that are going to allow us to do this in the best way possible to keep you as safe as possible. So the deadlift, let's talk about first how it relates back to our squat, our push-up, and our jump, and then overall posture. So in the deadlift, we're going to choose our stance to be a little bit narrower. So instead of going super wide like we would a squat, in the deadlift, our hips are going to be a little bit higher. So remember, we choose this wider squat stance when we're really trying to get our hips really low to the ground. When we don't need that hip mobility, we're going to go a little narrower because we're going to be a little more powerful here. We would put our feet together if now we're doing a push-up or we're hanging on something where we don't need that balance. But the hips right, or the feet right under our hips are going to give us that best mixture of tightness and power. So from this position, what the deadlift really looks like is everything's nice and tight, and I'm going to ultimately end up in a position that looks just like my jump. So that's the image I like to have in my head. As I set up to the bar, I'm going to stand as close as possible to it. So remember, what we like to think of is our center of gravity is where my shoelaces tie, the middle of my hip, and the back of my neck. Whenever we're lifting an external load or a weight, what we're trying to do is get that weight as close to that frontal plane as possible. Millimeters matter. So the first thing we're going to do is just stand really close to this bar. If you look down, it should be covering about where your shoes tie. And we're going to take our stance. We're going to get set up just like we always do, butt tight, belly button drawn in, hold your Kegel, twist your feet, rib cage down, stand tall. We're going to get those shoulders back, and we're going to twist in like we would be twisting in on a push-up. So now what I like to do is create your jumping position. That jumping position has about a 45-degree angle, and we have our shins vertical. From that jumping position, we're just going to squat our way down, trying to maintain that same 45-degree angle. From there, my hands are going to be just outside of my hips, but from there, I'm going to try and maintain that same angle as I come up to that jumping position, and then I just stand up with it. Now to go back down, I'm going to create that jumping position again, and then squat my way back down to the ground. So when I'm doing an actual deadlift, I'm not going to pause like that, but pausing like that can be a great way to learn. So most importantly, set up every time. We want to get in the habit and routine of setting up. Everything gets nice and tight. Create that jumping back angle. We don't want to round and let everything go and then try and get into a good position. What we see over and over again is it's too late. What we see very consistently, if on the way down, your back rounds right here, and then you set up perfectly, almost always when you get tired, out of breath, or the weight's heavy, when you hit that same position, we see the breakdown happen right there over and over again. So be perfect on the way down, even without the weight, so you can get ready for it. Everything nice and tight. Create that jumping angle, squat down to it, and then we're going to stand up. So with the deadlift, what we like to do is check in on people. There's a lot of stuff going around the internet. A lot of deadlifting technique is all based around wearing a weight belt. So what we want you to remember is that with the weight belt, we're going to draw in, put a weight belt on, and then we're going to poof out into the weight belt. And that's going to create this fake tightness in our backs. Without a weight belt, we want to brace the different way. We want to draw in, act like you're wearing that weight belt, but we would draw in away from it and then breathe into that position. So what I like having people do is draw in, go here, pause, draw in, make sure you're tight, go down to the bottom, draw in, make sure you're tight, and we can make those pauses through the movement. Our biggest problem we see, it used to be people rounding, but now most people know that this isn't a good position, so now the biggest thing we see is people overextended. And now you're sitting bone on bone in your back, and a lot of nasty stuff happens in that deadlift. So what we're looking for, jumping position, squat yourself down to the bar and hold and maintain those good positions. Now, if it's light, then that setup works. But what do we do if the weight is a little bit heavier? We want to get maximal tightness at the bottom. So think of having a car and you're trying to pull another car out of a ditch and they're tied together by a rope. If the rope has slack in it and you take off, that rope is going to snap. But if you go really, really slowly, get that rope tight, now you can actually pull that car out. So we're looking at the same thing. So with lightweight, it's pretty easy. I get the same tightness here by coming down, and it's easy to stay tight and pick it up. As I go down, naturally I stay tight. If this is heavier, I want to be a little more careful with everything I'm doing. So here's a strategy we like to use when we set up. Again, we stand, get everything tight, get ready for it. I'm going to create my jumping angle and I'm going to squat my way to it, and then I'm going to wiggle around to get my hands where I like. Now what I'm going to do is try and create that tightness in the rope from the analogy. I'm going to stick my hips up in the air and I'm going to pull on the bar to pull myself down to it, and now when I go, I've got maximal tightness to stand back up. That way we get tight before we go. So I have two techniques that I use. One, if it's light and I'm in a workout, I get tight up here, I go down to pick it up. The other, if it's heavier and I'm going to spend a little more time setting up, I want to re-get that tightness so I can really get going off the floor. So, moral to the story, deadlifting, use and load the muscles the way we would in a jump. Squat down into it, squat back up, stand up, back to the jump, squat into it. What we see a lot is as soon as people return for that second rep, they leave their hips up. So just keep thinking jumping position, squat. Jumping position, squat. Jumping position, squat. All right, enjoy.